Now let's go over what you need to do once you have the new DIM table loaded into your data warehouse. The first thing you need to do is add any DMSK values to the keys table, which may be needed for reporting purposes. You'll notice that our DIM contracts table that we created in the previous video only has DIM contract SK in the contract ID columns. For this table, we want to add two new SK values for DIM client SK and DIM employee SK. So I'm going to add these and save the updates. We'll refresh the table column list and see that we now have the two new columns showing up correctly. Now that we've added the two new columns to our keys table, we need to add the logic to our update key Sprach to populate these columns. To do this, just locate the DIM contract update key Sprach that was created by the SQL automation process. You'll notice this line, which was simply added as a placeholder for the real updates. Now we'll add a left join to the DIM client's view based on the table client's primary key of billing ID. And we will add another left join to the DIM employees table view based on the TBL employee's primary key of employee ID. Remember, what we're doing here is adding these DIM SK values in order to make the join logic more efficient and simple in future steps. Now we can delete the placeholder in the update statement with the updates for the actual columns in the keys table. And I'm going to replace the DBO table name with the alias for the keys table in our from statement. Now we can simply add the keys table columns to the update statement. The first column is the DIM client SK, and you'll notice we're getting a red squiggly line for the DIM client SK in our keys table. This is because we haven't refreshed our local cache since we added those columns, so I'll do that now. Now all that's left to do is add the DIM employees SK column to the update statement. Once these columns have been added to the update statement, all we have left to do is to add simple where clause checks for null values in these fields to reduce the amount of work required to be performed each time this Sprach is executed. So I'll do that now. Remember, we're going to set up the execution of this Sprach to be performed at the end of our ETL process. The store procedure logic updated fine, as you can see, with no errors. So now let's execute the procedure and actually update the values in the DIM contract table. Okay, it looks like the store procedure executed fine. So now let's check the actual keys table to ensure we have data in the two new SK columns. Let's locate the DIM contract keys table in the object tree and select the top 1000 records. It does appear that we now have data in these columns, although there are not as many of the DIM client SK column values, so we'll add a where clause to check for not null in that column. And it does appear that we now have data in that column as well. The last step that we need to perform on the keys table updates is to add the execution of this store procedure to the SK update controller Sprach, which is called at the end of the SSIS process. So we'll locate the controller Sprach in our object tree and modify it. And down towards the end, we'll add the execute statement for our DIM contract updates key Sprach, which we just modified. Remember, this store procedure is called at the end of our SSIS process so that we can ensure that all of the related tables required for the SK updates have been populated. Once we have added the execute statement, we're ready to update the store procedure. Once the store procedure is updated, then everything should be ready for the SSIS process to execute complete. The system auto-generates views for all of the DIM tables, which simply combine the DIM table data with the data from the keys table to make it easier to work with that data on down the line in our facts views. As you can see in our DIM contracts view, the two new DMSK columns we added are not showing up in the view yet. There's another SQL automation store procedure which adds the columns to the view, so I will show you that Sprach now. It's also in the master database. The name of the Sprach is USP SSIS Create Index for Keys Table. As the name suggests, it auto-generates indexes for all columns in the keys table, as well as creates and updates the DIM table views. This is another component of the SSIS automation process, which you should really never need to update. I'm simply showing you some of that logic here. As I said earlier, this Sprach is called at the end of the SSIS process to update DIM table views. We will manually execute it now in order to show you what it does. There are two parameters, database name, which is EDW in our example, and ETL schema name, which is SSIS in our example. As you can see, it lists all of the tables and columns, the code referenced in the update. So let's look to ensure that our DIM contract keys tables are listed. And there they are. Now let's close all that down and go back to our DIM contracts view to ensure the columns are now showing up properly. We will refresh the metadata for the view and then expand the columns list to ensure that the two new SK columns are listed as expected. We do now see those columns listed in the view. So we'll go back up and select the top 1000 records from the view to ensure that the columns are showing the proper data as expected, and they are.